Well, hello. It's a beautiful day here in Tweed Heads, and my visit is being hosted by Rustam Yumash of the Brain, Mind and Memory Institute. Recently, I prepared a peer presentation on heart rate variability biofeedback. And I say peer presentation because I'm not an expert in this area, but I've been monitoring the research and attending presentations, doing a bit of reading online to enhance the work that I already do in my clinic in Toowoomba, where we are a traditional psychotherapy centre, but we're adding in the powerful modality of biofeedback, particularly HRV, heart rate variability, but also EEG biofeedback. And Rustam saw that presentation and asked if I'd record it to share with you, members of the Brain Mind Institute. So first of all, I thought I'd have a play. It's as easy as an ear clip. And the program that I'm using today is by HeartMath. This is called M-Wave. We've got a few different devices. There are different publishers that produce different equipment and different software. This one's pretty basic. Just calibrating, checking if I've got a pulse this fine Sunday morning. There she blows. So at the moment I'm not really interacting, I'm just observing. That in itself, of course, is an interaction because one can't help be judgmental. Observe what the data is saying and wonder what it's suggesting about your biometrics. So on this screen we've got a few bits of information. Over here on the far right we've got a monitor that allows you to perhaps be guided in the rise and fall of your breath. So letting it go. This monitor can be adjusted, so if that breathing rate's a little slow or a little fast, you can set that to suit. But really I'm trying to improve the rhythmicity of that power that's produced with the inward breath and the outward breath. The importance of breathing. It's really great that we've got an automatic system that cues the breathing without us having to direct that traffic, as long as that's working for you. If you're a little under-aroused, a little flat, and you need to invigorate, as long as you draw attention to that underlying level of energy, you can actually override it, switch gears into manual, use a bit of cortical control to activate that brainstem. If you're a little overactivated, you can take a moment, observe the breath, slow it down. So the idea with heart rate variability training is that we're actually improving that variation between the beats per minute produced on the inward breath and decreasing the beats per minute on the outward breath. It's that transition from sympathetic nervous system to parasympathetic, being able to regulate the body. Down here is a little bit of an indication about how well I'm doing. The green indicating, yep, most of the time we've got good heart rate variability occurring, and when I get a little over-focused, a little tight, lacking in variability, the colour monitor starts to change. There are training tools in here for people who might need some guided breath work to help them find that rhythmicity, and there are other screens that we can flick to. So if I drop out of this, I can do an alternative visual feedback, something a little less intimidating perhaps than all that statistics and graphs on the screen. If it's going to load for me. Here we go. So I've got this black and white world. Down here we've got some data showing my resting heart rate around 60 beats per minute. Been recording for about 18 seconds. And it's giving me a little bit of feedback about my state of dysregulation. The green's going, okay, you're starting to find your rhythm. And we've got this nice visual feedback affirming that shift as I bring colour to my world. So even though recording for your pleasure is a little stressful for me, I can become aware of that. I can use the visual feedback to just affirm my mindful attention to that inner state of arousal, and try, despite the circumstances, to get that inner peace, a better regulated heart rate. I use this particular program with younger people that I work with, or folk who are a little intimidated by too much talk or too much information, and they really just need to tune into themselves. And this is a lovely way to just sit back and facilitate somebody becoming more self-aware. Biofeedback is a really powerful add-on in our clinic for elevating insight. I'm not going to spend any more time in this program. I just thought it might be nice to start with giving you a visual and a practical of the ease of using a heart rate variability trainer or device. This one's ear clipped and dongled to the computer, but you can also get devices for other technology that people might be more familiar with today, or more to have something that's a bit more mobile. For example, this one produced by HeartMath and Inner Balance. It's got your classic Apple dongle, so you can have that portable wherever you take your smartphone or other tablet, and you can also get that in Bluetooth. But as I said, I'm not promoting any particular product, just the technology itself. Introduction to heart rate variability biofeedback. This is a duplicate of a Mental Health Professionals Network seminar that I recently ran, that was attended by Rustam of the Brain Mind Memory, who's hosting me today. So thank you, Rustam. So the purpose of this session is to clearly define heart rate variability and heart rate variability biofeedback as it might be used in mental health care, to provide you a brief summary of the evidence of heart rate variability biofeedback as an efficacious health intervention, and I'm going to share with you some of the research that demonstrates that this is an important health intervention, not just targeting mental health symptoms, but also improving biological outcomes in physical health conditions. Overviewing the steps involved in heart rate biofeedback training, and perhaps offer some more practical demonstrations of heart rate variability hardware and software. And in particular, I want to thank Fred Schaffer from Biosource Software, because it's been Fred's teachings and content that he's shared via Biosource that's really been the primary informant of anything that I have to share with you today. For those of you that like a little of the neurophysiological underpinnings of this story, central nervous system plus peripheral nervous system equals autonomic nervous system. So this is a quick recap of prior learning for some, and perhaps inspiring new learning for others, just understanding where all of these underlying neurophysiological symptoms lie. And in particular today I've been referring to this, the balance of energy between sympathetic activity and parasympathetic activity. That function that stimulates activation, that fight-flight mechanism, versus our recoup, rehabilitate, relax system, the triple R's that we're often targeting in the therapeutic context. Recoup, rehabilitate, relax. Another way of looking at that parasympathetic and sympathetic in terms of all the structures that are involved and the functions that are involved in that rest versus react symptomatology. The sympathetic nervous system, constricting pupils, stimulating saliva, slowing the heartbeat, constricting the airways, stimulating the activity of the stomach, inhibiting release of glucose, stimulating the gallbladder, stimulating the activity of the intestines, contracting the bladder. You can see here the reference from biological science for this graphic. Thank you to that text. And the sympathetic nervous system, that fight-flight mechanism, dilating the pupils, inhibiting salivation, increasing heartbeat, all of the things that have to happen to activate the organism to take action. And it's really healthy that we have both of these systems enabled, but what we often see in the mental health context is that activation forgets to switch off. We start becoming hypervigilant to potential threats and stressors. A lot of those can be coming from our own perceptions and thoughts about things that are going on for us, within us or around us. And once that fight-flight system is activated, it's certainly producing a lot of worthwhile functions for us, but if it doesn't deactivate, it can become toxic, overwhelming and exhausting. So one of our roles in mental health is to really help people to tune in to that level of activation, particularly when it's hyper activated, and teach them how in the right moment to become aware of that level of arousal, appreciate its role, its function to help the individual survive, but at the same time be able to regulate, calm and switch gears to that parasympathetic when we need that time out for rest and recovery. So indications of that sympathetic over-arousal can be biological, psychological, social. And these few slides are just to give you a quick reminder or a summary of what some of those indications might be. So some of the physical indicators, we're in that state of acute stress when the structures of the central nervous system are activating that fight, flight and freeze response. So some of the things we might notice in others or observe within ourselves, that accelerated heart rate, palpitations, increasing the blood flow, muscle tension as the blood volume increases, ready for action, rapid breathing to increase oxygen levels, perspiration to control temperature. You may even experience or have reported to you headaches or dizziness or abdominal complaints as the blood flows to essential organs. And with all of that work going on in the body, consequences of fatigue, hypertension and sleep disturbance. I find this sort of information really useful working with clients. They may be very aware of these behaviours, this biology, but not understand the underlying intent. What's my body doing? And that knowledge can be really powerful to understand that just because you observe these behaviours in your body doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's your body working for you. So the more that we educate and understand and appreciate those functions, the less triggered perhaps we will be in terms of our negative perception of what these behaviours in our body means. If we can respect and appreciate when those elevation signals are going off, it can act as an attention getter, something that says, aha, my body perceives threat. Thank you, body, for getting my attention. Now if I can just hold this state, activate the cortex and start thinking and observing, I can assess for myself, despite what my brain automatically perceives in terms of potential threat, I can assess for myself, is there real and present danger? Or is it just the thought that because I notice my heart rate increasing, something terrible must be happening? So really, this is important education, not just observing the behaviours in our stress state, but understanding what's going on in our neurophysiology and why this is adaptive and helpful. And if we assess that this alarm has gone off in our body inappropriately, untimely, or with not adequate information, we can override that automatic system and start to regulate from the cortex. So those things that we used to think were purely automatic functions of the body do have the potential to be better brought to our attention so that we can improve our capacity for self-regulation of those things that we previously thought were very much under automatic control and outside of our direct control. So heart rate and heart rate variability, HRV. A healthy heart exhibits complexity in its oscillations and rapidly adjusts to those sudden physical and psychological challenges. Heart rate variability indexes that neurocardiac, get the language right, HRV indexes neurocardiac cardiac function and is generated by those heart-brain interactions and processes of the autonomic nervous system. So more HRV, more heart rate variability, more difference between those beats per minute at the top of arousal and the beats per minute at the bottom of arousal with the inward-outward flow of breath, more adaptability of the heart to stress, more resilience. Less HRV impairs the heart, nerve and muscle responses. This little graphic down here tries to demonstrate. So at the resting beats per minute, 70 beats per minute in this example, we inhale, we expect to see an increase in the beats per minute. In this graphic, up to 90 beats per minute, and then as we exhale, those beats per minute are decreasing. So it's this difference between the rise and the fall of those measured beats per minute that we refer to as heart rate variability. And we want this difference to be in the range of about 5 to 15 beats per minute. This one might, the one depicted in the graph might even be a little high, but we certainly don't want a flat line, never a good sign. So it's that variation that we're looking for, you know, in the theoretically perfect world, a sine wave of pure regulation, which is not particularly realistic in the world we live, but we certainly do want to become aware when we are too tight or too dysregulated. Good heart rate variability, approximately 5 to 15 beats per minute. Well, I've indicated down here 4 to 15 according to the literature. So just getting those defs right, the heart rate is the number of heartbeats per minute. Heart rate variability is that fluctuation in the time intervals between adjacent heartbeats. So variability is good. Faster heart rate reduces the time between successive beats, lowering heart rate variability, while a slower heart rate increases the time between those adjacent heartbeats, raising HRV. So just restating here, that difference of 2 beats per minute represents low heart rate variability, while 20 BPM is moderately high. So that balance, respiratory balance, or another term we might use for that respiratory balance, is your resonance frequency. So that resonant frequency range will depend on your own biophysical structures, but ideally somewhere in that range of 14 to 15 beats per minute. Why is it important? So this is a very quick extract from some of the literature that Fred Schaffer presents in his training, showing in both mental health and physical conditions, HRV is a really important metric. So fetal distress is preceded by alterations in HRV before changes occur in the heart rate itself. Another example, HRV analysis was shown to predict autonomic neuropathy in diabetic patients before the onset of their symptoms. So it's a real early indicator that can monitor, predict poor symptomatology, and because of that predictive quality of the HRV, monitoring and regulating HRV may reduce the onset of neuropathy, may reduce the onset of fetal distress. Low HRV has been confirmed as a strong and independent predictor of future health problems. So being able to regularly monitor, regulate and improve HRV, again, might be a predictor of improved health. Reduced HRV is also seen in disorders with autonomic dysregulation, including anxiety and depressive disorders, and in asthma. Reduced HRV is associated with vulnerability to physical and psychological stressors and disease. A resting heart rate that exceeds 90 beats per minute is associated with an elevated risk of mortality. So this is just a quick snapshot across a broad range of literature that shows us what an important metric HRV is. And while it's automatically regulated by the body, it's not necessarily regulated within a healthy range for some people. So it's important to monitor and be aware of our resting heart rate and our capacity to elevate, and to be able to maintain good rhythmicity, a good distribution of that energy, well-regulated heart rate variability. Just learning to recognize where your energy's at. You know, where's my energy at now? It's hard to determine exactly unless you've monitored. If you've been working out at the gym regularly, you know, after you've been using that feedback monitor, you know whether you're working hard enough or you're working so hard that you're going to blow a gasket and you need to back off. So similarly, if you start doing HRV monitoring as a regular part of every day, you don't need to have a device connected to your ear or your finger to be able to tell you if you're in the zone. Once you've learned to discriminate the target HRV, you can automatically find yourself in that place without relying on the biofeedback. You can learn to regulate once you've learned to discriminate that target level of energy. Cardiovascular health could be promoted with improved HRV via controlled breathing intervention. So HRV biofeedback, we add another letter to our acronym, the HRVB. So heart rate variability itself is just a metric, but we can introduce that metric into a training or a therapy context by giving people feedback about that metric, giving them audio or visual feedback to indicate what their current state of arousal is, what the current heart rate is, what that current heart rate variability is. So the biofeedback is the information presented back to the individual so that they can use that data to inform subsequent changes to their behaviour. Biofeedback operates on this notion that we can develop a heightened perception of our physiological events, that is our arousal state and function, and with that heightened perception and some skills training perhaps to help our capacity to influence that rise and fall of the chest associated with breathing, for example, the rise and fall of beats per minute of our heart rate, we can learn to voluntarily influence and improve our body's internal regulatory system toward a more desirable state. The control of involuntary responses through biofeedback is now seen to be an effective treatment in many disorders. Whether a response is learned and performed depends on our ability to discriminate and perform the target behaviour, whether that response is rewarded or punished, and our knowledge about performance results. What this is providing is a definition of operant conditioning method. So we're drawing in learning theory. It's not like we're putting anything into the system. This is one-way traffic. I'm not reprogramming my brain. This is purely measuring and giving me data. And by being taught to identify when that data reflects healthy function and being rewarded for maintaining that state of healthy function, I can soon increase my capacity to find that state of healthy function even without the data presented before me. That's learning, and that's the beauty of neuroplasticity. No matter what that default state of brain and mind have been, we can learn tools to change our default state. And learning and neuroplasticity enables us to retain that new knowledge. Keeping it simple. Pepper and Shambo have suggested that ordinary devices can provide valuable performance feedback. So we've been talking about a little bit of hardware, which is simple enough, but in the day-to-day around you, you can think about really simple tools that you may already use that give you feedback about biological attributes of yourself. So for example, in this example, they've talked about how performers might use a mirror to practice and reflect facial expression so that they can be more aware of how they want to present themselves before public speaking. You can improve your balance by training with a pair of bathroom scales. So there are particular scales that have got sensors. They'll only switch on with the touch of your skin on these sensors. And so learning to carry your weight in balance on a pair of scales so that then you get the feedback that your body's in balance. You can also use that data on the scales to shape your eating behaviour, of course, when that number is increasing, moderating the inputs. People have been taught to reduce hand tremor in Parkinson's by having a series of bells, and so being able to get that immediate feedback when the tremor is on setting, because the bell will start ringing, and focusing your attention on silencing the bell requires that you tune in and regulate the motor function of your body. Refining a tennis serve using a camcorder for video feedback. There are a variety of things that we use in every day to become more aware of our biophysical attributes, and then using that data to influence change in our behaviour. In the clinical context, we might prefer high-end biofeedback devices that will enable simultaneous measure and recording of those various biometrics. We can gather data. I think this is probably an example of one. The Airwave Pro, so similar to this personalised device, you in a clinical context can get access to heart rate variability training software and hardware that also has database capacity, so you can not just look at the individual's data, but you can compare that to a database. You can track individual performance over time. So there's different quality hardware and software systems depending on if it's for personal use, clinical use, or even for research purposes. And this technology is becoming so affordable and so portable with our modern developments. So I've just indicated here that while you can purchase high-end technology, there's also very low-tech that's also very powerful for just in-home and use beyond the clinic. I've seen on smartphones the potential to not even have a plug-in, just to be able to place the finger over the phone sensor and through a blood volume measure, be able to get heart rate readings simply on a smartphone. So these technologies are going to continue to evolve, but it's the power of that technology and the biofeedback for improving human function and outcomes. This is another way of picturing how these components in the client's environment can influence our brain events and subsequent behaviour. So I've adapted this particular image from Tom Kalura's text. I think it's just called Introduction to Neurofeedback. In traditional psychotherapy, there's a lot going on as a result of interaction between brain, mind and the environment. How we think, how we feel influences how we act. And in traditional therapeutic mode, I might be working with someone to understand, to identify particular thoughts and feelings and how that subsequently influences their behaviour. And so through a therapeutic course of sessions, we might be externalising, observing those behaviours that are an external representation of events that have been going on in the brain, and even help people to understand their thoughts, beliefs and even hidden subconscious beliefs being able to be brought to their awareness. And with that observation of those behaviours and those thoughts, I'm just going to go back a moment, that becomes another input to the brain, because we have these influenced perceptions about our thoughts, feelings and subsequent actions. And with that new insight, with that new knowledge and other skills that we develop, we can mediate change in cognition and behaviour, classic CBT. Biofeedback can be an adjunct or even a standalone to this particular model of influencing brain and behaviour. So we've got this particular metric, whether it's the EEG, whether it's temperature, galvanic skin response, or today we're talking about that metric of heart rate variability. we can gather that data, and even though it's an internal behaviour of the body, that heart rate variability, we can record it, measure it, and display information about that metric so the client can see it. They can get beeps, for example, or music activated when they're in that peak performance state. So whatever that internal biometric, we can display it as external biofeedback, which can then be perceived by the client or the patient in a more objective way. So they can see it, they can then perceive, what does that mean, where's my energy at, what happens if, and they can be taught to start influencing the behaviour of their mind and body in order to see an output that's different, and learning to influence that feedback loop. What am I doing? What can I do to shift that image on the screen, or to increase that sound effect, whatever audio-visual feedback you've enabled? You can in fact provide tactile feedback too. So if you've got a participant who's less responsive to audio or visual feedback, you can have a device that is, for example, has a tactile function, vibration. So they might have a device sitting in their hand that starts to vibrate when they're in the zone and starts to calm when they're moving away from it. So they have to seek that tactile feedback. So it can be very personalised medicine where you can design a reward that is rewarding. And that's a really important component of operant conditioning. The individual needs to be able to perceive that target behaviour, and performing that target behaviour needs to be coupled with some sort of benefit, a reward that enables that behaviour to be reinforced. So the potential of HRV biofeedback. There's an analogy here to aerobic exercise. While aerobic exercise increases cardiovascular and respiratory efficiency, you don't have to run throughout the day to gain the benefit. Likewise, you don't have to continuously breathe at your resonant frequency to gain the benefits: improved homeostatic regulation, your regulatory capacity and executive function. Just small bursts of heart rate variability training every day can add increased quality of life, quality of function for you. So this particular author, talking about resonance frequency, Lira proposed that each individual's cardiovascular system has a unique resonance frequency which is caused by the delay in that baroreflex, and that links heart rate, blood pressure and vascular tone. I've previously talked about that resonant frequency just as that respiratory rate. This is just a quick summary of some of the conditions that have peer-reviewed literature demonstrating the efficacy of HRV biofeedback, decreasing problematic symptomatology in each of these conditions: anxiety, asthma, chronic muscle pain, COPD, congestive heart failure, coronary heart disease, depression, fibromyalgia. So as indicated before, a variety of physical and mental health conditions can be influenced with good efficacy using HRV biofeedback as a standalone or as an adjunct treatment. This is a little harder to read, so all I'll do is invite you to track down this text by Tan, Schaffer, Lyle and Teo. I believe it's also available as an electronic publication from the AAPB. The text is Evidence-Based Practice in Biofeedback and Neurofeedback. And what the authors have done is using this particular efficacy table, where level 1 is not empirically supported, through to level 5, efficacious and specific, because this treatment has been shown to be statistically superior to a credible sham therapy, pill or alternative bona fide treatment in at least 2 independent settings. These authors have looked at EEG biofeedback and HRV biofeedback in a range of conditions. summarise the literature and also summarise the efficacy rating for each of those conditions. So if you're looking for a really good accessible text that cuts to the chase, gives you the key findings that you want to know and the protocols recommended for particular conditions, this is a pretty good go-to guide. Quick summary of some of the efficacy ratings that have been reported in HRV biofeedback. Efficacious for anxiety, possibly for PTSD. Efficacious for depression. Efficacious for hypertension and prehypertension. Efficacious for chronic muscle pain. So these are the top 4. These are the areas that I would be quite confident to offer HRV biofeedback as a standalone or as an adjunct therapy in my clinical practice. Some of the areas where I might suggest to the client, look, there are some indications that this is worth trialling, but I would still suggest experimental in terms of the quality and quantity of literature available to support it, but certainly there's enough evidence to suggest that we could at least do a trial of HRV biofeedback for conditions such as asthma, even in maternal care, congestive heart failure, coronary heart disease. Efficacious for irritable bowel, being able to calm those abdominal complaints, possibly efficacious for abdominal pain, even in fibromyalgia and cardiopulmonary conditions. So certainly for a mental health context, anxiety, depression, hypertension, pain, a lot of evidence supporting that anybody working in these contexts should be considering offering clients HRV biofeedback, or at least indicating the availability of this modality and providing onward referral so that clients can trial this non-invasive strategy for improving their health outcomes. The fundamentals of HRV biofeedback. Biofeedback is a learning process, so psychoeducation, developing the knowledge within clients about target behaviours and the importance of those behaviours within their body, teaching them to discriminate and produce those behaviours, teaching the individual to voluntarily control aspects of their physiological activity. The aim of biofeedback training is to improve health and performance. Biofeedback instruments rapidly monitor an individual's performance and display it back. The individual uses that feedback to produce physiological changes. Those changes will influence thinking, emotion, and behaviour, and can reinforce sustained physiological change. And these changes become independent of external feedback from instruments. So as I said, in the early days, you may be dependent on the biofeedback to let you know where that state of arousal is, but once you've learned where that ideal state of arousal is and the tools to produce that, you can discriminate it even without the external feedback being presented to you. You improve your insight and capacity for self-control. There's a note here about voluntarily control, active versus passive volition. So I'm just going to expand on that for a moment. So this passive volition means that you're encouraging your body to produce change. So it's engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's why in the clinical context, rather than tell somebody, relax, which is actually a demand and can be perceived by the recipient as a threat. What if I can't relax? Sometimes when we try to coach somebody through controlled breathing, for example, we're getting the exact opposite response. Instead of calming, they're becoming increasingly frustrated because they're actively trying to control their breathing or actively trying to relax. And it's counterproductive, because actively doing anything, this active volition, is actually driving up the functions of the sympathetic nervous system. So really what we're doing is providing information encouragement and gentle reinforcement for allowing the change, the shift to occur, and then rewarding and reinforcing when those shifts are evident by the biofeedback, rather than demanding the change. So this is a really important concept, whether you're working in traditional therapies or using biofeedback modality. To what extent are we enabling passive volition, activating the parasympathetic response, versus forcing active volition and activating that sympathetic response? Progressive steps to training in optimal HRV. So this is essentially your clinical plan or your training sequence, what we need to do in order to conduct an effective session. So start by training optimal breathing, and most of the commercial devices that you might purchase will have a training screen or a training modality where a pre-recorded voice will actually coach you through optimal breathing, and perhaps some software will even have a way of measuring what your current optimal breathing rate might be, so that over time, as you improve that resonant frequency, you can allow adjustments that demonstrate that the software is adapting to maintain a personalised medicine approach for you. So first step, training and reinforcing that optimal breathing, trying to achieve that smooth breathing, that theoretical target of the sine wave, that regulated inward, outward breath, producing large amplitudes of shift. Secondly, you're training for that resonance frequency breathing to bring the heart rate and the respiratory curve into phase. And then we're looking for those oscillations so that the heart rate variation is more orderly and coherent. And over time, the person can visually recognize, monitoring it on the screen, visually recognize the coherence in that heart rate, and further through reinforcement they can start to develop an insight and awareness of what that coherence feels like when they're in the zone. Training for magnitude, aiming to increase the HRV, so that magnitude is increasing that power, increasing the volume under the wave that's being produced when we're tracking that heart rate change. Training for a spectral distribution, using rewards in the low frequency range, and training for relaxation and the cultivation of positive emotion. And that positive emotion can be something that we model and reinforce when we use language like, good work, nice breath, I like the way you released at the bottom of the breath. So helping people feel affirmed and encouraged for their efforts to improve that heart rate variability. Generalising beyond the clinic with homework, such as lifestyle modification, biofeedback practice beyond the clinic, using short, abbreviated relaxation exercises. You might coach somebody that for 60 seconds on the hour, you're to stop, notice where that default respiratory rate is, and take a moment, take 60 seconds to just tune in and do some mindful breathing, elevating and decreasing those beats per minute. You might encourage someone to engage in deep relaxation exercises and self-monitoring. So learning in a very structured way in the clinic is one thing, but then also giving people some real life tools and strategies to be able to take that learning and apply it beyond the clinic, because after all, change in the clinic is meaningless if it doesn't influence positive change in the real world beyond. I've got here a few hyperlinks, and wherever you're accessing this recording, you should also be able to access a PDF of the slides with the opportunity to directly access from these hyperlinks, or the references are there so that you can find those sources yourself. And there's also the opportunity, if you want to go much further into HRV biofeedback training, to complete certificate level courses. This one in particular is overseen by the Biofeedback Certification International Alliance, and allowing a HRV certificate program, 15 hours of didactic training, subsequent case studies and an examination. And there are a variety of places to access HRV technology. I've just referenced a few here, which are various places that I've previously sourced the technology that I use within my clinic. That's been a brief introduction, and I hope you've found it useful.